In my last video, I speculated about Focalor, the Hydro-Archon, but today I want to turn my attention to the nation she rules, Fontaine. In this video, I'm going to be exploring my ideas regarding the nature of the nation itself, as well as what I think we may have in store for us in the Archon Quest Chapter 4, the Masquerade of the Guilty. First and foremost, Fontaine's name is very on the nose. It literally means fountain in French, with Fontaine being the land of Hydro and being based off France. But I think we can expect it to look rather unique. Elements, elemental energy, and even alchemy are all part of the nature of Teyvat. They do things that real-world technology cannot do, and thus the nations we know so far rely heavily on them, instead of technology, which gives them a very natural feel. Technology brings along with it industrialization, but from Mondstadt to Sumeru, you won't find any factories or even cars. Even the cities don't have an urban feel to them. But what would happen in a nation that does rely on technology and prides itself on being in the bleeding edge of it? Midori, a young girl who lives in Inazuma City, tells us that in Fontaine the roads are built mid-air and that the wagons people drive fly like birds. This is the story of a child, and it's worth pointing out that she claims the rocks in Liyue are like living animals, which, unless she's talking about Ajudaha, is not quite true. But she gets her information from her uncle Ramsey, who travels the world and writes travelogues about this for his niece. Ramsey is originally from Snezhnaya, so while he may exaggerate his accounts, he has certainly done some actual traveling already. With or without floating roads and flying wagons though, Fontaine seems to be leaps and bounds ahead of the rest of Teyvat in regards to technology, and that fact has to be mirrored by everything else, at least in the city. The architecture has to change to accommodate for this new lifestyle, so Fontaine might feel like an actual city as we know them, perhaps like modern-day French cities. But it wouldn't be designed solely with functionality in mind. Remember, this is Focalor's nation. You think she wouldn't ensure it would be full of grandeur? And it's not just the city either, but also the people. Francis, a traveling merchant from Fontaine found in Liyue, says, "My home is a country that reveres true beauty and elegance. Some people from other countries may find our dress sense showy and impractical, but for us it is nothing more commonplace." I think this tells us something about the level of ostentation in Fontaine. You know, people take fashion seriously when they would forego comfort for it. But this also lets us have a little peek into the psychology of the people of this country. Focalor may not have earned the love of all of her people, but her desire to show off how perfect their nation is doesn't seem to be limited to her. Fontaine is ahead of the curve, and its people are proud of that fact. All in all, I'm expecting Fontaine to be inspired by modern-day Paris in a lot of ways, from the houseman style of architecture to its love for fashion, but with some twists. I actually don't think Fontaine's technology is anywhere near flying wagons and gravity-defying roads. That's something the Adaptai can do, so totally possible, but they do it through magical means and I'm not expecting sci-fi levels of tech. What I am expecting though is some steampunk vibes. A nation trapped somewhere between the past, well, our past, and the future. And this is a personal view, but I think some of the Fontaine-made devices we've seen, like the core of the apparatus and the Evermotion mechanical painting, do exude a certain steampunk vibe. So I'm thinking Fontaine might not have flying cars, but rather zeppelins and submarines. Yes, submarines, because you cannot tell me that the land of Hydro does not have a large underwater area. And if it doesn't, I'll riot. We already have wave riders, why can't we have submarines? Vasco, who is a part of the Adventurers Guild and is located in Port Ormus, had a rather unfortunate adventure at sea which inspired him to get the diving certificate from Fontaine. So diving must be somewhat common in a land of Hydro if one must go all the way there to obtain a certificate. And if it is common, then an underwater area isn't very far-fetched. Don't forget Vasco, he gave us a very interesting detail, but we'll get there later. For now, water. More than just an underwater area, I'd expect Fontaine to have several bodies of water at the surface level. It might be based off France, but I wouldn't be surprised if it pulled a page out of Venice's book and had water canals scattered throughout the city. Okay, now that the stage is set, what is the play like? We got to Fontaine, it looks very unique, very pretty, very extravagant. Now what? I already talked about this in part 1, but I don't think we should expect a warm welcome. For reasons I have already explained, Focalor likely isn't stoked about having the traveler in her land. But she might not be the only problem. Even this chapter's name is ominous. The Masquerade of the Guilty. At first glance, everything will probably appear picture perfect in a land of justice. but under the surface, the corruption might be bubbling up and it's only a matter of time until it makes itself known. Well, perhaps it already has. Last time we saw him, Liban said there is something very oppressive about Fontaine at the present moment. Even the regular folks seem to be antsy, anticipating some form of judgment that they believe will befall them soon. And listen, what Liban says goes. He knew things would go south in Sumeru before anyone else. He always seems to have little hints for us about what's going to happen next, so I believe him. And why would the people feel like this? Well, it might have something to do with the fact that their precious water is being polluted. Remember Vasco? Yeah, he said that maybe getting a diving certificate in Fontaine wouldn't help his case because the water over there is different. He didn't elaborate at all, so we can only guess at what he meant, but we do know the Log Folk have the ability to influence the water. The Spring Fairy of Springvale keeps the water sweet, while Rodia turned their waters bitter to try and kill little Andorra during the event Wishful Drops. Xavier, a film student from Fontaine, talks about his home, Petrichor, and how pure its waters are. You would expect the waters of the land of Hydra to be pure, but this might not be a natural phenomenon, but the Log Folk's doing. Yes, Rodia and the rest of the scouts really have no love for Focalor, and it has been hinted that this is a widespread sentiment among the Log Folk. But I don't think they all left Fontaine. After all, Andorra left much later than Rodia. So maybe Fontaine's water is different because it's being protected by the Spring Fairies. But there is only so much they can do. You see, France has had problems with water pollution for a long while now, and I wouldn't put it past the writers to mirror this in-game. Remember how I said that technological development brings about industrialization? Industrialization, in turn, brings about pollution. We have had 2 different NPCs comment about this very issue. Fontaine's air is said to be full of toxic fumes and the sky may not be properly visible, which is concerning to say the least. If the air is in such a sorry state, then the water is soon to follow. The Log Folk can protect it, but a drop in water quality can also be fatal to them. Focalor is allowing her nation to destroy itself, which in turn is angering the Log Folk and maybe even other elemental creatures. People know things are wrong and can feel the mounting pressure, but Focalor cannot allow her mask to drop now. She needs to be perfect and she cannot do so if her people are worried. So instead of fixing the issue, she rules with an iron grip. If you thought Beelzebul was misguided in her search for eternity, then you should see the Hydro-Archon. Maybe this nationalism we have seen some characters from Fontaine display isn't something that's natural to them, but rather was cultivated. Focalor's court may not judge sins, but perceived sins. So long as you don't damage your image, you are good. And if you are keeping your nation ahead of the rest, then you are definitely good in her books. Pollution be damned. Focalor seeks to judge all others, even her fellow Archons. She must be better than them. Only then will she be safe from Celestia's wrath. So, to sum it up, Focalor is so desperate to be seen as perfect that she's willing to trample on her land to achieve her idea of perfection, and instead of fixing her mess, she sweeps the dust under the rug and punishes anyone who brings it up. How dare they expose the stains in her judgment? Another thing I'm really looking forward to in this chapter is the noses. So far, not a single god has particularly cared about their noses, but Focalor is so afraid of Celestia that I can't imagine her just simply handing it over, especially if she knows that Tsaritsa is planning to wage war on the heavens. So I'm really excited to see a confrontation between the Hydro-Archon, the Traveler, and a Fatui Harbinger. And speaking of the Harbingers, I wouldn't be surprised if Sandrone makes her first appearance in Fontaine. After all, she too deals with complicated technology. According to both Tartaglia and Scaramouche, she seems to have a little bit of a bad attitude, which I can only guess will spice things up. It's just my speculation based off what little lore crumbs we have been given. The story could turn out to be completely different, so take everything with a massive grain of salt. One way or another, I'm really looking forward to Fontaine. What about you? Are you excited about the Land of Hydra? How do you think the story is going to play out? Do let me know in the comments down below. Also, as you might have noticed if you have watched any of my previous videos, I got a mic! So feedback on the audio quality is very much appreciated. That's all from me today. My name is Blue and I'll see you again very, very soon. Safe journey, travelers!